Now, this is the big thing every Uber and Lyft driver needs to hear, but doesn't want to. Just trust me, I know right away. I think not a lot of drivers are gonna like what I'm about to say, but I gotta say it. And that is this: there are a lot of amazing benefits of being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver. And I think, although everything being considered right now with all the negative aspects, there are a tremendous amount of positives that have resulted from both Uber and Lyft. And I know when I mention this, a lot of drivers don't want to hear it. They're like, no way, Uber and Lyft is horrible. They treat their drivers like slaves. And this is all true, keep in mind. I think it's important, though, to have a lot of cognitive dissonance when it comes to, yes, there are a lot of negatives with Uber and Lyft, but also a lot of positives. And it's interesting because when I make a video like this, talking about just the big picture of both the pros and the cons, a lot of drivers immediately click out. The audience retention, as it's referred to on YouTube, tanks. However, if I do a video being like, oh, Uber and Lyft sucks, here are all these negative things about Uber and Lyft, the audience retention stays a lot higher. Meaning when I make a negative video, and I just mentioned this in my previous video, when I make a negative video about Uber and Lyft, people like it a lot more than when I make a positive video talking about the benefits. But I did want to do a video like this because I feel like, don't get me wrong, yes, there is a lot of negative things going on right now. In the past 3 or 4 videos I've made have been kind of negative videos towards Uber and Lyft. Because, let's be honest, no one likes what they're doing, right? With charging passengers on the passenger side more money, and then on the driver's side, giving drivers way less money, and they're now even just determining, oh, well, we like this driver, we don't like this driver. For the same ride, we'll pay one more or less than the other will pay more or less, or whatever. As I call it, algorithmic wage discrimination. And this huge thing with algorithmic data discrimination and wage discrimination and everything going on, and that's obviously just one sliver. Uber and Lyft is doing a lot of horrible things. There's no way around that. That being said, though, I do kind of want to talk about this because I feel like on one end, yes, but on the other end, there are some positives. Before filming this video, I did some research. Turns out there's over 7 million drivers, combining Uber and Lyft, over 7 million drivers in the world. I mean, if you think about it, that's 7 million, or excuse me, over 7 million new jobs created out of nowhere in this huge niche. I mean, that's pretty ridiculous if you think about it. Literally millions upon millions of jobs. In addition, we all know the benefits of Uber and Lyft. Just to quickly mention them, of course, the flexible schedule. That was kind of unheard of. I mean, when Uber and Lyft kind of came about, people were like, wait, I can drive whenever I want. I don't have to tell you in advance. I can stop driving whenever I want. I mean, now it's kind of commonplace. The gig economy, as it's referred to, is everywhere now, right? There's a lot of companies that have kind of adopted the Uber and Lyft model in terms of Postmates, although it did get bought out by Uber. Instacart is another great one. I mean, there's a bunch of different companies that now have a flexible schedule. And I have to be honest that I think if it wasn't for Uber and Lyft, the gig economy as we know it probably wouldn't have had the huge jump start that we all know now. I mean, if you talk to a company now and they're like, oh yeah, you can work whenever you want, you turn on the app, or you start whenever you want, you end whenever you want, people are like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. We don't even think about it. But back in the day with Uber and Lyft, that was so mind-blowing, right? And as it was a result of Uber and Lyft. Of course, instant cash outs. You know, I've mentioned this before in other videos. The fact that you can instantly cash out and have your earnings in a second in your bank account, even right now, I don't really know a lot of companies that are like that. Like YouTube, in case you don't know, YouTube pays me once a month. No instant cash outs on YouTube, and YouTube has been around for years longer than Uber and Lyft. With my music, I don't get instant cash outs for my music, right? There's a lot of businesses, I feel like 99% of businesses don't have anything even remotely close to instant cash outs, and it's kind of ridiculous, right, that Uber and Lyft has that. Another thing, of course, is the low barrier to entry. This is another one that I think is very kind of underrated and overlooked when it comes to Uber and Lyft. I'd say the average driver, of course, remember your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you make as a driver. The average driver, I'd say, makes about $20, $25 an hour. What's interesting for me, going to college, studying for years, getting an accounting degree. If I look at some entry-level accounting jobs or bookkeeping jobs that require an accounting degree and accounting knowledge, sometimes they pay around $25 an hour. And it's like, wait, so I just spend 4 years of school, rigorous studying. I studied on average about 40 hours, not exaggerating, for each exam. And now I'm making $25 an hour. Yet when I, if I want to start driving, all they really have to do, which is kind of ridiculous, is have a driver's license. Oh, that's it. That's it. And even if you don't have a car, you're able to really and easily rent one. I think that's another underrated thing. And the one last point I want to make, and then I'll jump back into the main point of this video, but just, again, really highlighting the benefits, because I do want to mention this, is that when it comes to the benefits, if you think about it, one big thing too is being able to work as much as you want. I mentioned this in the previous video that when I used to bartend, people would complain being like, hey, I really want to get more hours, asking my boss or my manager, is there any way I can get more hours on the schedule? And my boss would be like, no, sorry, we're completely booked. With Uber and Lyft, I've never heard of any point in time, maybe during the pandemic, I will say, maybe during the pandemic, but in terms of normal lifestyle, I've never heard of a driver going on, hitting start, and them saying, sorry, we have no work for you. You can work as much as you want. And I do want to mention this because if you look at all the videos I've done talking about the negative effects of Uber and Lyft and what they're doing, when I've talked to a lot of drivers, looking at the comments and doing some research, a lot of them have said, hey, I started driving for Uber and Lyft because it was amazing. And another big aspect too, I might as well say, and this is very important too, a lot of these comments come from immigrants who are like, hey, I immigrated to America. I couldn't get a job. I've talked to a lot of Uber and Lyft drivers in person as well who've said this, I couldn't get a job. It was super difficult. Now I'm driving for Uber and Lyft and I'm supporting my family. I can put food on the table. I can work whenever I want. I don't have to worry about missing my son or daughter's dance recital or their concert at school or their soccer event. I don't know why every American kid plays soccer, as a side note, yet I feel like soccer is probably the least watched sport in America. It's kind of weird. But anyway, I digress. They don't have to miss any of these big moments. However, and I think this is the way the pendulum has swung, a lot of drivers feel trapped now. And I think that's the big thing that I've noticed, that I don't think, although I get, again, a bunch of hate comments, not towards me, but towards Lyft and Uber on all these videos, and a lot of people saying, oh, Uber and Lyft, treats their drivers like slaves, or the worst companies ever. They take advantage of drivers. All these things are true. I think there are a lot of positive aspects to Uber and Lyft as well, like I mentioned. And I'm going to be honest that I think for a lot of drivers, although maybe sometimes it's very easy to look at the negatives, I think for a lot of drivers, I know this is a bold statement, I think it has changed their lives in some ways. I will say, I know it sounds kind of ridiculous. I think if it wasn't for Uber or Lyft, I don't think I'd be where I am now, in a sense, right? Within reason, that may be a bit of a over-exaggeration, but it is true. When I first started driving, I was able to work on YouTube and music whenever I wanted. I had a great schedule. I woke up at 6:45 a.m., would drive for 2 hours, come back to my house, work on music and YouTube, and do a workout and everything. I'd get done around, say, 4:30, jump back out on the road, drive for 2 hours, boom, I'd work 4 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and then sometimes I'd drive on a Friday and Saturday night and everything, unless I had a DJ gig or something else was going on. And I think this is true for a lot of other drivers as well. And like I said, I think the biggest thing for a lot of drivers is feeling almost stuck or pigeonholed in ride sharing, right? Let's say you immigrated to this country, it was difficult to find a job, things are really, really tight, and then you start driving. And let's say this is 4 or 5 years ago, you start driving, you're making great money, things have gotten worse and worse. There's no denying that in terms of the wages, deactivation, all these different things going on, the liability, the legal aspects. I feel like we're hearing more and more negative things about both Uber and Lyft. There is no sugarcoating what they're doing, and this is not meant to take away from the negative things they're doing. And I think for a lot of drivers, they feel pigeonholed where things were great, now things have gotten worse and worse, and now they feel stuck, and they're like, well, I don't know what to do now. And I feel like it's that frog analogy, in case you haven't heard it, in terms of the boiling frog analogy, where if you have a boiling pot of water, you put a frog in it, the frog wants to jump out. But if you have a frog and you put it, say, in a lukewarm thing of water, and you slowly heat it up until the point it's boiling, the frog won't move or try to get out of it. As a side note too, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know where that analogy came from. That might actually be biologically true. I generally don't know. That's the analogy. And I think that that's probably what a lot of drivers feel like. For a lot of drivers, I guarantee, who've been driving for years, if they were to start driving now, they probably, actually, let me take that back. They probably wouldn't even start driving. If they knew what they do now, they probably wouldn't have even jumped into it, right? Like, let's be honest. However, they've been driving for so long and everything, they're so used to it, the lifestyle, that they're like, hey, I want to continue driving. And that's one thing I've noticed for a lot of drivers. They want to continue driving. It's not like they don't like driving for Uber and Lyft. A lot of them do like it. It's just all the issues that I've mentioned in a bunch of other videos. The biggest one, I think, being the most understandable, is actually the pay. And I will say, I mean, it is tough to say. I think that right now things have definitely gotten worse, and it seems like they're continuing to get worse. And as I said, I think the pendulum, starting at a positive perspective of what Uber and Lyft is doing, has now swung negative. And I think it's continuing to get worse. However, one thing I'm very curious to see in terms of just the overall timeline of events is that pendulum will swing back to the middle, where rides used to be super cheap for passengers, drivers usually get paid a lot. Now it's the exact opposite. Passengers are paying more money than ever before, drivers are getting paid less than ever before. And I wonder that overall, as time is going to be continuing on, if the pendulum will swing back to the center, where in the end, luckily things will have a better balance. Drivers will get paid accurately and what they should be getting paid, and passengers, luckily and overall, will be able to pay, I think, a reasonable fare. And I gotta say though, I think there is a lot of big benefits for drivers even right now. And I've mentioned this before in a lot of other videos, that when you look at a lot of drivers, it's interesting that you almost have this like 20% spread on one side, and then on the other side, you have this 80% spread. And what I mean is 80% of drivers hate driving for Uber and Lyft. 20% of drivers, though, love driving for it. I mean, I mentioned this before, that in Austin, Texas, when I was there, I was talking to a driver who's making over 100K driving for Uber. And he was saying, he's like, I drive 4 days a week. I try to do about 12-ish hours each day. I will say, too, he's been driving for years, so he kind of has all the big bonuses. He has like a huge account on Uber and everything. But he's like, making over 100K. I drive 4 days a week, sometimes 5, but typically 4. And he's like, I'm able to pay for my kids' colleges. I can drive whenever I want, all these benefits and blah, blah, blah. And it was kind of interesting how he almost got, I don't want to say emotional, but I think that's maybe a unique way to word it, because he was super thankful that Uber and Lyft existed. When I was in Nashville, talking to a driver, said he made between $700 and $800 a day on a Friday or Saturday driving in Nashville. He was super thankful for Uber and Lyft. And I hear these stories a lot. But I think the issue is this is really 20% of drivers. And like I said, about 80% just hate driving for Uber and Lyft. And even when I mention these stories, a lot of times I get comments of people saying, hey, Mark, they're lying. There's no way anyone makes that insane money with Uber and Lyft. But there are a lot of drivers that really, really do. And like I mentioned in the previous video, I think this is why that there's no middle ground with Uber and Lyft. Either you hate Uber and Lyft or you love it. And this is getting more and more polarizing. But it's like anything, right? For example, here in LA, and let's say you want to get a mixed drink, even like a cheap one. You're looking at minimum $12 or $13. I'd say $15 is the average price for a mixed drink. Yet when I've traveled to Austin or Ohio or Illinois, especially, I remember mixed drinks were $1 or $2 at one bar I went to in Illinois, like $3 for a more premium liquor. And the crazy thing is, if you look at that from people in LA, they're like, how are you spending that little? People in Illinois are like, how are you spending that much? Same thing. Nothing else has changed. It's just the location. Same thing for a lot of drivers. Remember, because your location really has such a big impact on how much money you can make, I think this really creates this huge polarizing aspect. And just overall, I think coming back to like the main point of this video, I know I've kind of bounced around a little bit, but I think there are a lot of positive aspects for Uber and Lyft. It's really gotten a lot of people to be able to start driving, start making money. You don't need a college degree. You don't even need an associate's degree. You just need a driver's license. You don't even need a car. You can rent one if you want to. Although I will say, I think the rental program has gotten worse. I remember when I first heard about it it was Lyft Express Drive, and I think if my numbers are correct, if you drove 63 rides or did 63 rides in a week, you could have the car for free, which is pretty wild, right? If you did 63 rides or more every week, you didn't have to spend any money in the rental car. Then Uber came out and said, all right, we're going to charge people a flat rate of $200 a week, every week to rent a car. I feel like, okay, $800 a month, you could put on an unlimited amount of miles, not bad. Now, I mean, $200 is insane to find. I think for most drivers I talk to, they spend anywhere between $250 and $300 a week. So yes, rental, because of inflation, probably a bunch of other things going on. The whole rental situation with Uber and Lyft has gotten a bit worse. I will say that. But overall, I think that there are a lot of negative aspects for sure, but there are a lot of positives. I think it's always important to look at both sides. You know, like I mentioned in that previous video, a lot of times when I make these raw, unedited videos, I do want to be very transparent. We're talking about the pros and the cons. And my goal is to not come off ranty, so to speak, although I know that's like a big thing on YouTube of people ranting about whatever they feel like ranting. But I think it is important to look at both sides. And I think because I made so many negative videos recently about Uber and Lyft, I do want to say that, look, as much as we hate to say that, yes, Uber and Lyft is doing all these negative things, it's created millions of jobs, really was the first big companies to kind of push up the gig economy, allowed tons of people to start making pretty good money without any degree, any prior education, any prior certification, besides a driver's license. It was able to, get a lot of people in the door to start making money, like say, immigrating to this country. And I know it's a huge issue trying to find jobs when you immigrated here, and you're trying to figure out all these weird things in terms of living in America. And Uber and Lyft is right there to help you out, right? So there are, I think, a lot of amazing benefits of Uber and Lyft. Of course, though, I think right now, if you look at the timeline, the pendulum has swung to the negative side. And I do think, unfortunately, I think things are going to continue to get worse with Uber and Lyft, if I had to predict it. But with that being said, I do hope that in the future, maybe this year or next year, that the pendulum will start swinging down to more of a middle point, that although, yes, there's a lot of negatives, the positives start being highlighted a lot more, because I know right now they're not. And hopefully there'll be a better balance with both drivers and passengers and, of course, investors, where everybody will be happy and content with the ride-sharing world.